نرحب بالدكتورة إليزابيث كاندل المتخصصة في شؤون اليمن وأستاذة اللغة العربية والشعر الجهادي في جامعة أكسفورد البريطانية. شكرا جزيلا دكتورة إليزابيث لوجودك معنا مرة أخرى في البرنامج.
عفوا.
دكتورة، كيف خسرت القاعدة معناها؟
Well, I think several things have happened. So I would say that the organization has lost meaning and the actual label al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has lost meaning. Perhaps we could think about this as three things happening at the same time. The first is that because the war in Yemen has fragmented and proliferated so much, there are lots of different competing militias, and often it suits them to what we call false flag attacks to AQAP. And this covers for politically motivated attacks, especially in the south. And then the second thing is that many of the al-Qaeda fighters have themselves consciously decided to desert the group or leave the group because there are so many other causes that also pay well. They might leave because of money, they might leave because of a political cause they want to fight. And then the third thing, and perhaps this is the most important, the group itself is diluted. It's become splintered and weak. There have been different breakaway groups, and these bits of al-Qaeda have themselves forged alliances. They have to, because they need to do that to survive. And there's lots of opportunity because, of course, there are over 40 active war fronts now in Yemen. There's a very complex network of different militias, so they've been blending with them and perhaps also being instrumentalized by these different actors in the war. And so just to sum up, why might that happen? It's because there are many overlapping objectives, aims, goals. Things like profiteering from the war, smuggling groups, organized crime, all sorts of different groups wanting to stoke tensions in the coalition to make things difficult for the coalition fighting the Houthis. Things like wanting to quash democratic ambitions or hopes of a separate southern state, and trying to destroy the Riyadh agreement, an agreement that was signed in 2019.
هل يفاجئك دكتورة هذا الانحدار الذي يعيشه التنظيم منذ وصول باترفي إلى القيادة؟
Yes, that's an interesting question. There was an opportunity when Batarfi became leader in early 2020 for him to create a new momentum around the group, to perhaps as a more ideological figure, as someone who had a strong religious background and a very strong pedigree and had fought in Afghanistan with his Yemeni roots and his southern contacts. There was an opportunity, but my feeling is that there was already such a downward trajectory. The group was already infiltrated by spies. It was already so weak. It was very hard to get that momentum back. And it does seem that he's failed. There was also talk that he had been captured in October 2020. And in fact, that was confirmed by some groups like the United Nations. I know you wrote about that based on the UN report. But of course, he has appeared subsequently in videos. So if he is captured, then he's still being given occasional opportunities to peddle his ideas. But whatever the case, he's incredibly weak now. And the internal infiltration of al-Qaeda, I think, must be complete. Because even since he came in, so many people have died, have been droned, have been picked off. The arguments continue, and there's just no opportunity for the group to discuss their differences, to figure them out, to come to an agreement, because they can't meet. They can't meet because it's too dangerous. And their communications are completely shot. So I think it's understandable that he has not been able to pick up the group.
دكتورة إليزابيث، أنت أول باحثة تلتقطين الخلاف الذي وقع بين باترفي وجماعة أبو عمر النهدي. هل تتوقعين أن يشكلوا النهديين أن يشكلوا نواة لقاعدة جديدة في اليمن؟
I think it's very dangerous to predict anything to do with al-Qaeda in Yemen, because it is a group that evolves and adapts. And even when we feel like it's splintered, it's fragmented, it's weak, suddenly it comes back again. And so it's very hard to figure out what's going to happen next. But what I will say is that these splinter groups, any one of them has an opportunity with the right leadership to start to dominate. And it's also possible that under certain conditions, they might even rejoin, realign, figure out their differences. So the bottom line here is that it's incredibly dangerous to think that the group has died, declined to the extent that it's going to disappear. It's very important to remember that the ideology always hangs around, and with the right conditions, and that could even, by the way, be peace, with lots of disgruntled, disappointed groups, they could resurge again.
دكتورة، أثناء التحضير للمقابلة سمعت البودكاست اللي شاركتي فيه حضرتك مع كول بنزل في موقع hoover.org، وحكيتي فيه عن الكتيب الذي نشره تنظيم قاعدة اليمن في سبتمبر الماضي بعد شهرين من سؤالك على تويتر عن معنى التنظيم، وكأنهم كانوا يسمعونك أو يقرؤونك. غريب حقيقة أنه بعد كل هالسنوات يفكر التنظيم بإعادة تعريف ذاته.
Yeah, that's right. It did seem quite surprising that they would be, after 12 years since al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula was founded, suddenly decide to issue a over 60-page booklet saying, who are we and what do we stand for? And I can only think that this was in response to, and not just me, but a lot of people feeling that they lost their way, that they were disintegrating. And so I think in a way there was a logic to issuing the booklet, particularly because they said this isn't just for outsiders, this is for people who are joining our movement, who are in our movement. So there must be, to me, it proved the fact that there must be splinter groups around that have different independent ways of thinking now. It was at pains to stress are completely independent of any state or government or any of their militias on the ground. And so, by the way, there was one exception to that. The exception was Afghanistan. They said, oh, we're very close to Afghanistan and we love the regime of the Taliban. But it was like they were trying to recapture the moral high ground, or what they see to be the moral high ground. And so I guess there are two ways of looking at it. You could say that this booklet was either a denial of any politicization or instrumentalization of al-Qaeda, or it was an attempt to cover it up. But either way, it shows weakness.
دكتورة إليزابيث، وبمناسبة الحديث عن طالبان تحدثتي في ذلك البودكاست عن المحلية التي أكد عليها الكتيب. هل تعتقدين أن قاعدة اليمن قد تطلب سلاما مع الحكومة أو السلطة في اليمن على غرار ما فعلته طالبان؟
So I'd like to split off the support of al-Qaeda for the Taliban with any idea that they can be equated to the Taliban, because Taliban were a massive movement that had considerable popularity and strength in Afghanistan, whereas al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula are a tiny, fragmented movement with nothing that could be described as popularity, apart from in very small, straggly, tiny groups. So I personally think it would be a huge mistake to even consider speaking to such a down and out and unpopular organization in Yemen and try and bring them into the peace process. It would be endowing them with some kind of credibility that they definitely don't have. And I think it's important, particularly for Western analysts who are a bit more removed perhaps from the locality, to understand that not all flavors of Mujahideen are the same. Not all flavors of local al-Qaeda franchises are the same. And actually, that was also one thing that this booklet stressed. It said, look, we have our overarching goals, that we, al-Qaeda, have. And they are, as ever, to expel infidels from Muslim lands, especially the Arabian Peninsula, and ultimately to launch a caliphate. But we also, each of our branches has its own specific local agenda and goals that it also focuses on. So that they're really trying, I think, to make sure that they seem like a stitched together organization whilst recognizing there are a lot of individual parts in reality with very local agendas.
الحقيقة دكتورة هاي نقطة بنحب نأكد عليها، ودائما ننتظر تحليلك ورؤيتك للأحداث، فأنت حجة حقيقة فيما يتعلق باليمن. في الفترة الأخيرة علقتي حضرتك على إعلان القاعدة عن هجمات ضد الحوثيين، وقلتي إنها إشارة ضعف أو انقياد أو تشتت. كيف دكتورة؟
Yes, a claim of an attack actually showing weakness might sound contradictory. But what I had noticed is that the rate of claims of attacks by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is actually now less than 1/10 of what it was when it was at its peak in 2017. The attack rate was at its peak. So first of all, the whole rate of claim shows a massive decline. But second of all, the type of attacks. Over the whole of October, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula formally claimed only 3 attacks. They were all against Houthi vehicles, just car bombs essentially, bombings of Houthi vehicles. They were all in al-Bayda, in the southeast corner of it, and they were really pretty insignificant, especially in the context of the overall war. If a group that has as much international attention as al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, manages 3 improvised explosive devices over the course of 4 or 5 weeks, it doesn't really seem like such a great threat. So how do we explain this? Well, either there is only one small branch of al-Qaeda left and it's hanging out in the southeast corner of al-Bayda, and that's it. Or, in fact, there are other fragments of al-Qaeda, but for some reason or other, they're not claiming their attacks. There are many attacks happening around Yemen, particularly in the south, not necessarily because it's not involved at all, but because it may be a junior partner in an alliance. Therefore, it would be following rather than leading, and so not claiming those attacks. And one other interpretation is that perhaps the al-Qaeda media itself is being manipulated now. That whoever's running it wants to position al-Qaeda simply as a force that's fighting the Houthis. Of course, this would suit the Houthis, right? Because they then are the number one and only enemy of al-Qaeda in Yemen. All that al-Qaeda is claiming is to attack the Houthis. So, you can draw your own conclusions. I'm not going to make any hard and fast statements on this, but I'm not sure we should take it at face value.
دكتورة، ممكن تحكي لنا عن المهرة؟ الحقيقة نرى في حسابك على تويتر صور لشباب وشابات من المهرة يدرسون، يدرسون، يرسمون، يعيشون. والحقيقة هذا مهم جدا، لأن الجهاديين دائما بيصوروا أنفسهم على أنهم يريدون أن ينقذونا من أنفسنا، من دونهم نحن في جحيم. حدثينا عن المهرة دكتورة.
I'm very glad you asked about al-Mahra. So this is the governorate in the very far east of Yemen. And it has a very unique sense of culture and identity. It even has its own language, Mehri, which predates Arabic. And it's not a dialect, it's its own actual language. So there's a very strong feeling in Mahra of its own identity and of trying to control its own future. And don't forget, even when al-Qaeda was in Hadramaut, right next door, 2015 and 2016, and ran its state, it didn't manage to encroach on al-Mahra. So what's been wonderful to see are these very enterprising local initiatives by grassroots organizations trying to take control of their future. things like cleaning up their coastline. And there's so much energy going into education, women's education and literacy. The classes are full. I'll just end with explaining one flagship program that I've been trying to help with is a small program for kids called Ana wa Nahnu, which is trying to teach kids how to look at conflicts from your adversary's perspective, or trying to teach them how to take responsibility. If I want this to happen, what do I need to do to make it happen, rather than just wait for someone to give it to me or help me with it, just to take some action yourself. And I think the secret here is trying to build up projects which local organizations have thought of. It's their idea. They're already doing it. And just, I will maybe help them fundraise or advise if they ask on how to strengthen them a little more. But it's not my idea. It's not a Western idea. It's not a do-good aid organization idea. It's their idea.
الدكتورة إليزابيث كاندل من جامعة أكسفورد، شكرا جزيلا لوجودك معنا دكتورة.
Oh, Afwan, thank you for having me.
وشكرا جزيلا لوجودكم معنا في راديو وتلفزيون الآن. أنا نهاد الجريري، مع السلامة.
حصلت الحركة على